Hello, I'm Maria and welcome back to my Nook. Today's video is going to be all about the books that I have read in March and April. The first book I finished in March was The Dragon's Promise by Elizabeth Lim. This book is a YA, I believe, fantasy book, and it is the sequel to Six Crimson Cranes. Six Crimson Cranes had been the book club pick of February of the Wyverns and Words book club, which I'm participating in, if you will. And I had actually quite enjoyed that book, so I went on to read the sequel. I don't know if I can tell you much about what's happening in the sequel because it obviously is based on all the events that happened in the first book. But after the events of the first book, the main character Shiori has something in her possession that she has promised to take to its real owner, its actual owner, and she has to find out who that owner is first and how she can get to that owner, and obviously other people want to have what she has in her possession, all that sort of stuff. By the way, I have a reading vlog on my channel in which I had started this book, not finished, but started this book. I will link that video down below in case you want a more in-depth first impression. So I'll try to keep it short now. There was quite a bit of back and forth going on in this book, and some parts felt a bit messy, even though it all was woven together at the end. I still felt like we were straying from the main mission at some points of the book, which had me a little bit bored. And even though I could see the bigger picture at the very end and I understood that everything that had happened had to have happened and it all made sense, I still found myself bored while reading all those passages before knowing what was supposed to happen in the end, obviously. And that did not happen in the first book. Also, at the end, like 60 pages before the book ended, there was another thread thrown into the plot, and I understood that it was a necessary plot point to be tackled, but 60 pages before the end of the book, I don't know, that felt kind of off for me. Other than that, I enjoyed all the descriptions, I enjoyed the world and the characters again, but since I gave the first book 4 stars, if I remember correctly, and this one I enjoyed a little less, I think I'll give it 3.75 stars. The next book I read was The Burning Bridge by John Flanagan. It is the second book in the main Ranger's Apprentice series. Again, I'm not sure how much I can tell you about the actual plot of this book because it is not the first book in a series, but there is war going on and fighting, and the main character Will and his friends and ranger companions have to kind of try to stop things from happening, and some stuff goes wrong. This book hit me in the feels at some points, actually. There was one pretty major plot point that I had figured out in the prologue, and that was kind of a bummer. But to be fair, these are kids' books, so I don't really expect the most intricate of plots from them like I expect from high fantasy books, for example. I still really enjoyed this book. I loved being back in this world with the characters that I had already gotten to know in the first book and getting to know some new characters. I had some good laughs, I tapped quite a few scenes, I've actually just really enjoyed this book. Honestly, I feel like sometimes this series is just a nice change compared to other fantasy books that I read more often, because those are often a little heavier when it comes to the plot, and these are just kind of easy to digest and flow nicely, and they're kind of cozy, even though sometimes shit goes down, but just the fact that they're easy to digest. Yeah, I just really enjoyed this book, and I gave it 4.5 stars because I thought I liked it a little better than the first book, which I gave 4 stars. In retrospective, I'm not sure anymore if it actually is 4.5 stars. Compared to other books, I have given 4.5 stars, but if I stay within the Ranger's Apprentice realm, it probably deserves 4.5 stars. And now I want to mention a book that belongs into a category that I will probably only mention this one single time, because Daughter of the Moon Goddess by Lynn is a book I have DNF'd, which means I did not finish it. And I have a whole reading vlog on my channel in which I started the book, DNF'd it, and then started the book that I'm going to talk about next. So if you want to watch a more in-depth process of that whole thing, I'm going to link that down below. But I just want to mention this once because Daughter of the Moon Goddess was actually the first book I have ever DNF'd, so it's quite a big deal for me, and that is not because I'm usually against DNFing books. I totally think that life is too short for reading books that you don't actually enjoy, or forcing yourself through books that you're not having a good time with or anything like that. But I just sometimes have this fear that if I DNF a book now at, let's say, 20%, what if the good part of the book starts at 25% or it starts at 30% and I will have missed out on a book that was actually good for 70%, and maybe I would have only given it 3 stars, but it could have still been a good book, you know what I mean, if I had just been patient a little longer. So that's a fear I sometimes have. But then again, if I'm just not feeling the book right now, how long am I supposed to wait until I connect with the book? You know what I mean? So that was my issue with Daughter of the Moon Goddess by Lynn. I just did not connect with the book due to many reasons that I'm not going to go in depth right now, because I've talked about them a lot in that reading vlog actually. But yeah, it was a difficult decision for me to DNF that book. I was at 29%, which was chapter 10. I had finished chapter 10 for the people that have read the book, and it was just not for me. But in the end, I feel like I made a great decision, because the next book I read was this Savage Song by Victoria Schwab, or V.E. Schwab, same person. And this is one of my new favorite books. I'm currently reading the sequel to this. It's a duology, which is Our Dark Duet, and I am loving this series. This Savage Song had me hooked at like 30 pages or something, which was so much better already than Daughter of the Moon Goddess, and it was exactly what I needed at that time. It was so intriguing. The start was a bit info dumpy, but that's just often the case with fantasy novels, because you're being thrown into this world where so many things are new and so many things are different from our world, obviously, and there's so many concepts and sometimes magic systems or just systems in general that you have to learn and understand in order to know what's going on. So yeah, that was something. I also had to get used to the fact first that this was an urban fantasy. In this book, there are the two main characters, Kate and August, and they live in a country in which monsters get created through acts of violence. There are 3 different kinds of monsters, and the capital city of the country they live in is divided into north and south. The north side is basically ruled by Kate's father, and the south side is basically ruled by August's sort of adoptive father. And August is actually one type of those monsters. August is the type of monster that can basically extract souls with music. And honestly, this whole concept is so fascinating to me. I love it so much. This whole book just has such a particular vibe that I loved so much, and I loved the dynamics between Kate and August so much, and the characters. The whole world building was so well done, and music was just so well included into the story. It was not just mentioned or anything, it was actually part of the world building. Also, I really liked the way there was dichotomy. There were so many thought-provoking questions in this book that I really liked, and I don't know, I just love this book so much. I do want to say that there were POV changes in this book that were never actually indicated, so it never actually said like Kate or August beneath a chapter or whenever a POV change happened. And I'm mentioning this because there was another book where I critiqued this rather heavily once, but in this book it was done well. I just never had this moment where I thought, okay, but whose POV is this right now? And I was just never confused about whose POV we're following right now. And I never really had to think about it, which is different from the book where I critiqued it heavily. But I still wanted to mention it just because I once critiqued it in another book, so I didn't want to just leave it aside. But again, I loved this book so much. I gave it 4.5 stars, and that's why I said about The Burning Bridge that I'm not sure if it's the same kind of 4.5 stars that I give other books. This 4.5 stars is so incredibly close to a 5-star. I just didn't give it a full 5-star because the start was a bit info dumpy, and in retrospective maybe it was a 5-star, but maybe not quite. And the fact that I'm not sure about it maybe proves that it's not a 5-star. Maybe 4.75. I don't know. I'm just gonna go with 4.5, but almost a 5-star. And now we're going to go on to the books I read in April. Hello everybody, we are now at the end of April, so I want to talk with you about all the books that I have read in April. There's a lot. It's been a month, let me tell you, like some reading month, because I've read that many books. But let's start with the first one I finished in April, and that was Our Dark Duet by Victoria Schwab, or V. Schwab. And this is the sequel and the finale of this Savage song. in the Monsters of Verity duology with a bit of adventure and a tiny sprinkle of romance, but that's closed door. Like, nothing happens on these pages. And before I start talking about this book, I just quickly want to mention that if you're thinking about checking this duology out, please, please, please check out the trigger warnings beforehand if you're sensitive to any topics. I'm not sure if I mentioned this while talking about this Savage song, but this duology is brutal. Brutal. Like, there are some very violent scenes and some very detailed descriptions. So please just keep that in mind if you're thinking about picking these books up. But now let's talk about how much I loved this book. I already loved the first book so incredibly much, but the second book was even better. The first book just barely didn't feel like a 5 stars. And when I say this book was better, you can probably guess how I'm going to rate it. I really, really liked the way this book showed us how things have changed after the events of the first book. I am not sure how much I can talk about what's going on in this book because some of it would be spoilers for the first book. I think I can tell you that in this world, as I've already mentioned about this Savage song, there are 3 different kinds of monsters that are basically created through acts of violence. And in this book, a 4th type of monster suddenly appears. And Kate and August, our main characters, are trying to obviously get rid of that monster before it wreaks too much havoc. I loved the dynamics between Kate and August as I did in the first book. I loved the dynamics between characters in general, like the dialogue in this book. Yes. Yes. I also loved the format changes that were happening in this book. There were a few passages, not whole chapters, but passages that were formatted differently, and I just felt like it really added something. Like some kind of spark to the book, you know what I mean? I also really loved the way this book tackled morally gray areas, and there was so much dichotomy and so many thought-provoking aspects. I mean, the simple fact that every single person that has ever created a monster through an act of violence is called a sinner. There are no questions being asked, like what happened, how it happened. No questions being asked about the circumstances, the situation, who was involved, how long ago was it, what happened since, and all those kinds of things. A person that has been creating monsters through acts of violence every other month for years and years is called a sinner, just like a person who has created a monster through an act of violence on accident one single time years ago is called a sinner equally, even though what they've done might not have been equal. You know what I mean? And that is questionable. And I really liked the way that the book and the narrative went about acknowledging that it is questionable. There was one scene that was such an impactful scene, in my opinion. and I loved the way it was written. Also, the ending of this book wrecked my soul. No less than that. It wrecked my soul. It's been weeks since I read this duology, and I'm still thinking about it and still thinking about August and Kate, and I just wanted to protect them at all costs in this book, and they still have my whole heart. So all in all, I just really loved this book and this whole duology. Something about it just made me click with it. I don't know. I am giving this book 5 stars. Next up, I finished The Icebound Land by John Flanagan, which is the 3rd book in the Ranger's Apprentice main series. And this book, honestly, from what I had heard from a few people, I expected a lot worse stuff to happen in this book. There was a lot of shit going on and it was very painful to watch. Don't get me wrong, but I kind of expected even worse. You know what I mean? I'm not saying I'm disappointed, because I'm glad nothing even worse happened. But still, you know, my expectations were kind of somewhere else, and that does affect my opinion on this book, obviously. I still had a really good time with this book. I loved being back in this world once again. And I just love these characters. I'm enjoying them a lot. I still think that these books are pretty easy to read and just easy to digest, which is very nice from time to time. What I also found very nice about this book is how John Flanagan managed to make quite a lot of time pass in a very flowing way. It just flowed very nicely, the way time passed and POVs changed and everything. One thing I do want to say is that I find it kind of sad that there are actually not a lot of, but there are a few unnecessary comments within the narrative about characters' weight that I'm not sure why the author included, but they seem to be a theme in the series. I've noticed it in the 1st and 2nd book as well, and in this one too. And I just sometimes think like there was no need to comment on a character's weight at this point. Is there no other thing you can mention about a person's appearance? I don't know. I've just been picking up on it, and I just sometimes feel like the comments are a bit unnecessary. Again, I still really enjoyed this book, and I think I'm going to give it 4 stars. Next up, I read Shadow and Bone by Leigh Bardugo, which is the 1st book I ever read in the Grishaverse. I had heard about 6 of Crows before Shadow and Bone, and then I heard that there is a trilogy that happens before 6 of Crows, the Shadow and Bone trilogy, and that reading the Shadow and Bone trilogy first would make it way easier to understand the world and the magic system and everything when you read 6 of Crows. So ever since I first heard about it, I had wanted to read Shadow and Bone first before reading 6 of Crows. Now, 6 of Crows was announced the book club pick of the Wyverns and Words book club that is run by Cassandra, Lynn, and Katie is reading, of April. It was the book club pick of April. And I was like, well, guess this is the time for me to read this trilogy, because this book has also been on my physical TBR for months. And now I read it, and it was kind of underwhelming, I have to be honest. The beginning was interesting, even though it was incredibly confusing. I really loved Mel's and Alina's dynamics. Oh, maybe I should talk about what this book even is about. It's a fantasy book. And there's this girl called Alina who thought she's just a normal girl all her life. And then suddenly this incredible magic bursts out of her. And this guy, the Darkling, who's a big guy in this country, wants her to... I don't even know what exactly he had intended with her, but he wanted her to learn more about her magic and like live with him at the royal palace and probably like fight against their enemies, other nations and stuff like that. And obviously things go differently. So, as I already said, the beginning was interesting and it was fairly easy to read. The world kept my curiosity for a while. There was an actual plot and the love interest was a decent guy that I actually liked, which is always a good thing, honestly. Because if you don't like the love interest, right? But honestly, there wasn't much about the story that really made it stand out much. To be honest, I was even zoning out quite a lot while reading this, which I don't zone out that much. I don't have a bad focus. So if that happens, it's usually because whatever I'm doing, whatever I'm reading is pretty bad at keeping my focus. You know what I mean? To be fair, maybe it was a little my fault too, because I kind of made myself binge read this book. And by made myself, I mean that I didn't binge read it because I wanted to binge read it in 3 days, which is quite fast for my standards. But I actually really made myself binge read this because, as I already said, I wanted to read the trilogy first so I could then get to the book club pick for the month, and I wanted to finish the book club pick in time, obviously. So I was kind of on a schedule. So I did that to myself, and it most probably influenced my opinion on this book. But still, the fact that I was kind of bored for like, I don't know, 150 pages-ish of this book stays the same. And I objectively understand and think it was good that the author included everything she included in this book, because it definitely made it easier to understand just how frustrating the training and the studying was for the main character Alina, or how certain things stretched on and on for weeks for her. But sadly, not even the writing style really wowed me. Like, if that had been the case, then maybe even the slightly more boring passages would have been more enjoyable. But it just wasn't the case. I didn't really have many big emotions during this read. I did like and connect with the characters. I mean, some more or less than others, obviously, but I did. But all in all, I still think this first book was kind of mediocre. I feel like the ideas and the world and the magic system and everything, also the characters, held more potential than what was put on the pages in the end. So I gave Shadow and Bone 3 stars. Even though I did not really enjoy the first book, I still went on and read the second book. Siege and Storm by Leigh Bardugo, because I heard that other people say that the series gets better, or like the second book is better than the first at least, so I just went on and read the rest of the trilogy. I do not, however, own the second book as a physical copy, so you'll have to do with the picture on the screen. This book I actually did enjoy more. There was a character introduced that I really liked. Maybe not even just because of their character, but also because of their character, but also because they were interesting. There was finally a new interesting character thrown into the bunch. I mean, the characters from the first book were interesting too at the beginning, but then I kind of got bored with them, so having a new character introduced that brings a new spark, you know what I mean? That was very good, honestly. And I don't really know what was exactly different about the second book, but something about it, I just felt so many more emotions during this read, which that alone shows me that I enjoyed this book more. I can't really talk about more about this book. I also can't really tell you what was going on in the book because spoilers, but I definitely did enjoy it more, and I'm giving it 4 stars. And as I already said, I finished the whole trilogy, so I also read Ruin and Rising by Leigh Bardugo, which I do not own as a physical copy either, so you'll have to do with the picture. I enjoyed this book more than the first book as well. Like, ever since the second book, I just enjoyed the trilogy so much more than the first book. I don't know why exactly, but the second and third book just made me feel so many more things. Like, the third book was a roller coaster, but I felt things, you know? There are so many things I would love to mention and say about this book, but I can't because they would be spoilers. What I can say though is that the ending of the book, like the very end, not the very end, but the very end. That felt a tiny bit rushed. Not rushed exactly, but it kind of felt as if the thing that was going on at the end was over in like 10 minutes in story time. And I was like, didn't you just start with this and now it's over already? Like, I don't know, but maybe that was just me. Maybe I just read it that fast, but I'm not that fast of a reader, so I don't know. And also, like, it's been a while since I finished that book, and I kind of miss the group of people that was thrown together in this book. Not gonna lie. I just enjoyed this book. It wasn't a phenomenal read and probably not one of my favorite fantasy reads ever. Absolutely not, actually. But I did enjoy it. I had a good time with the second and third book. The third book had other good aspects compared to the second book, but also other bad aspects compared to the second book, so I feel like all in all that kind of balances it out again, and therefore I'm giving Ruin and Rising also 4 stars. And now let's talk about one last book that I finished in April, and honestly I can't even believe that I made it. I can't believe, but I actually managed to finish the book club pick for April in time. which was Six of Crows by Leigh Bardugo. And that also means that I read 5 books in April. 5 whole novels. No novellas, no graphic novels, 5 whole books. I don't think I ever managed to do that. Definitely not last year. I am so proud of myself that I managed this marathon of reading, but I think May needs to be a slow reading month. Anyway, let's talk about Six of Crows. I filmed a whole reading vlog on this book, so I'll try not to go too much into depth on my thoughts. I'll try to keep it short. Six of Crows is a YA fantasy book. By the way, also please check trigger warnings, because there are some things happening in this book where I was like, is this still YA? I don't know. But in this book, there is this guy, Cass Brecker, who is quite the criminal in the city where he lives. He is offered the chance at a heist that will reward him with a great deal of money. And for that, he has to break into a military stronghold and retrieve a hostage, a very valuable hostage. So he brings together a group of people, 6 dangerous outcasts, as the cover so amazingly puts it, and they try their luck at this heist together. So I already said that Shadow and Bone is definitely not one of my favorite fantasy series. Now Six of Crows, everybody. Oh, I love that book so much. I finished it 2 days ago and I loved it so much. I loved the vibes, I loved the dynamics between characters, I loved the dialogue. That was so good. I loved some of the descriptions that were in here. Like, I know there's a scene in here where one of the characters' eyes were described as the near black of bitter coffee. Like, yes, yes, give that to me, give that to me. I enjoyed the banter so incredibly much. I enjoyed getting to know these 6 crows and getting to know their backstories and seeing their sometimes a bit heated relationships, but I enjoyed it so much. It was also so crazy to me how some situations and actions of the characters felt so random and impulsive, but then later on somebody would like make a comment, or it would just turn out that it was all planned. Maybe not exactly this way, but basically this was all planned the whole time. But in the end, you can kind of never be sure. And that just made it really enjoyable, in my opinion. The only things that threw me off a little bit were, one, the ages of the characters. Like, they're all very young. And sometimes, like very often actually, their actions just don't really match their ages, or their ages don't match their actions. I don't know, but one way or another, it sometimes just didn't really match. I honestly feel like if the author would have made each of them 1 or 2 years older, that would have already made quite the difference. But this way, it just sometimes kind of confused my brain a little bit. In the end, it was a minor thing though. I still really enjoyed these characters and I still really enjoyed the writing and the story and everything. And the second thing that kind of threw me off was that there was one of the main characters, one of the 6 main characters, that had not a single POV chapter in this book. Like 0. And the other 5 were basically balanced out. And I just think that it's quite the choice for an author to not include any POV chapters for one of the 6 main characters that you have in a book, while the 5 other characters get POV chapters. You know what I mean? I heard somebody say that in Crooked Kingdom, which is the sequel to this book, Leigh Bardugo actually writes about the fact that a lot of people have asked her this, and she said that she did write some chapters for that character, but they all felt wrong, and she didn't include them because that character was not a crow yet in the book. But I honestly don't understand that. Like, why wasn't that character a crow yet in the book? And if that character was not a crow yet in the book, for the reasons that I think Leigh Bardugo means, or I assume she means, then another character shouldn't be a crow yet either in the first book. I'm confused about that argument. But in the end, that too is not really a big thing. I enjoyed this book so much, and I am giving this 5 stars. Definitely 5 stars. Also, I want to mention that this book is so heavily tabbed. I even went in and counted the tabs because I was like, I don't think there is any other book that I've tabbed this much. And then I looked at Our Dog Duet, which is kind of tabbed about as much, right? So I went in and counted the tabs on these 2 books, and Six of Crows has 23 tabs and Our Dog Duet has 24 tabs. Is that not kind of crazy? I don't know, I think that's kind of crazy. I just enjoyed these 2 books so much, and like the more I tab a book, the more you know that I've enjoyed it. So those were all the books that I have read in March and April, quite a lot for my standards. And I would love to know how many books you've read in March and or April, or which books you've read, which was your favorite. You can tell me that as well. If you don't want to tell me any of that, you could tell me if you've read any of the books I have read in March and April and what you thought about them. Or you can subscribe to my channel, give this video a thumbs up, or follow me on Instagram. So I will see you guys somewhere else on the internet. Bye!